What's up, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to the Avarice Podcast. Tonight we're going to embark upon an adventure that we may not reach the end of. I'm going to test the waters and see how I feel about this. I'm going to start doing commentary tracks on Game of Thrones. I feel like it'll go well and I'll have enough to talk about, but I won't really know until I get in there and try it. So here goes nothing. We're going to watch the pilot episode today. I've got my coffee brewing right now. When it's done, I'm going to sit down and hit the bong. Then I will give you a countdown that I'm starting the show in case you're going to watch it along with me. I'm watching it on demand right now. Unfortunately, as soon as the run ended on HBO, they took it off of Amazon Prime for free. So now I'm using my Comcast on demand HBO to watch it. Excuse me. So the runtime might be affected slightly because I don't know what kind of mumbo jumbo they've added into the beginning here. When I press play, it's just going to go straight to, it's not HBO, it's just regular ass TV, or if there's going to be some kind of previews or whatnot, I don't fucking know. So, I should say, there will be spoilers. I am coming at this from the perspective of a person who has seen how the show ends and now wants to go back to the beginning and see if I missed anything. Try to see if stuff fits together in a way that I didn't first notice. Of course, if you're a fan, you know that the last season was a disaster. But a lot of the end points were given to them by George R.R. Martin. So, and a lot of most of the first 5-6 seasons are based off of George R.R. Martin's books. They still had source material to adapt. So that's where the clues are going to be, is in those first 5-6 seasons, because that's the stuff that George created. And even though he gave them the ending, he didn't give them the framework of how to get there. So I would basically see it as an opportunity for me to try to kind of guess, I guess. I don't have anything better to do. It's bothering me that much. I don't know what the fuck's the matter with me. I've definitely been thinking about Game of Thrones way too much since it ended. Because my level of caring amplified exponentially after it was over for some reason. I guess I had faith that it was ultimately going to make sense at the end. I had faith that even though some of the episodes were bad, that they were leading me somewhere that was ultimately going to make sense, that I was going to realize why they did it and be able to justify it. I thought that they were going to explain a lot of these things that they didn't. So then when it was over and I actually got a chance to reflect on what we were given in that final season, I just can't get over it because it had so much potential. It's even driven me to purchase the books and start reading the books, and I have not really enjoyed reading my entire life. I'm not a voracious reader. I don't read a lot. It's just not been something I do. It feels weird to like sit silently and read to me. I'm not accustomed to doing it. It's not something that I grew up doing. But I'm so curious to know how the story is actually supposed to play out that I decided to start reading the books, and I'm like 80 pages into the first book. So I've read about as much of the book as this first episode's going to cover. But in the event that George R.R. Martin does finish the books and come out with his ending expressed in the way that he wanted and done with the pacing that we're accustomed to in the books, in order to fully appreciate that, I feel like I need to read all of the other books. So when he does come out with the last two, I can read those and have closure on the issue. But he may never finish them, and I may be just leaving myself open to more heartbreak. And the world turns. So yeah, I'm when I'm watching this, I will be referencing things that happened throughout the entire course of the series, things that the audience would not be aware of just watching the pilot. That's not the view I'm coming from it, or coming at it from. I want to see what hints we were given to things back then, and we didn't know what we were watching, so we couldn't make sense of it. That kind of stuff. Okay, let's just get this show on the road. Again, I'm watching this on Comcast On Demand. Pilot episode, Season 1, Episode 1, Game of Thrones. Pressing play in 3, 2, 1, play. And of course, it's silent. Stay tuned after the show for an inside look at the episode. Oh, man. Time does not look well upon the ones that they've done recently. I guess Daenerys just forgot about the Iron Fleet. So this first scene, we start at Castle Black on the wall with the Night's, the Night's Watch going north of the wall, I believe in search of wildlings. And wildlings are the free folk who live north of the wall and refuse to be governed, basically, refuse to follow any of the ridiculous rules of the Seven Kingdoms. But they're looked upon as enemies, and because of that, they come back at it with the same energy. So by viewing them as an enemy, they essentially create an enemy. But I suppose the wildlings also want to get south of the wall because it's an easier climate to live in, and they feel like they are forced to live north of the wall. Thus, why they plan an attack on it later. But this is their hook scene. This is their scene that either gets you interested off the bat or doesn't. And it's kind of interesting in retrospect because I'm usually not a big, we'll call it fantasy nerd. I'm somewhat of a normie. I get into things in certain spurts. Like I was into the Harry Potter series for probably the first 5 movies or so. But then I just stopped watching them. I don't really know how it ends or if it all ties up. I never read those books. I was never a big Lord of the Rings fan. I remember that the second movie bored the shit out of me, and I didn't watch the third. Again, never read the books. I got into Star Wars. I could get into Star Wars. So anyway, I'm surprised that this opening scene got me as engaged in the show as it did, because it's like a zombie thing, like right off the bat, and I didn't recall that the opening scene is White Walkers, which made you feel like they were going to end it with White Walkers. Because throughout the course, they spend a lot more time on the relationships between the people, the dialogue between the people, than they do on the impending threat of the White Walkers. They don't do a lot of exposition on the Night King, etc. It's left very mysterious and kind of in the back. But it is the first thing that they start us out with. And these symbols never lead to anything in the show. I want to know what that is supposed to be. It almost starts off like a medieval horror movie. Maybe that's what gripped me, and it feels like a horror movie in this opening scene. Quite a bit. One thing that's odd about the book is that the guy who is claiming to have seen them and that ends up being the deserter, in the book, he's a much older, much wiser seeming man and less skittish. Like, I feel like the words and the story about the White Walkers would be more chilling coming from a more distinguished, more experienced man. Not this young, squirrely kind of, you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with it. It works in the show. But now that I've seen how it plays out in the book is definitely way better. But they have to cut pieces out because of budget constraints, time constraints. If you wanted to film it exactly true to the books, oh my God, you would need 20 seasons. And a lot of people think the pacing of the show is slow. But then you read the books and you go back and watch the show and you go, why is the show moving so fucking fast? It's kind of they're skipping all over all this stuff. It's just they don't have time.
The dead men seem to have moved camp. They were here.
This effectively gets the same point across, but definitely doesn't play out the same way as it does in the book. It's got a very, other than the fact that it's in snow, it's got a very like Troy kind of 300 feel to it. And I'm into those kind of movies. It's almost like a Greek mythology tale in a way that it's mostly seems like people, but there's also magic and shit like that. So they were trailing the wildlings to this camp. Skittish homeboy stumbled upon it, saw all of them dead, arranged in the shape of that symbol, brought his homies back over, and it's all been cleaned up. So I need to clarify something. I've been referring to the undead or the zombies and the White Walkers as the same thing. I didn't realize that there was a clear-cut difference, like I have come to realize recently. So the ones with blue eyes, like the one that just chopped down that guy, the ones that aren't resurrected dead people, the ones that actually seem to have been this their whole life, those are White Walkers. The ones that have the ice spears, etc. And then there's the undead that have been resurrected by the Night King or the White Walkers. I didn't realize there was a distinguishment between the two prior to... I was watching a video on YouTube and they referred to him that way, and I was like, oh shit, that totally makes sense. I've been making an ass of myself by just calling everything that's dead a White Walker. So that is a White Walker. The little girl would be undead. Look at those eyes. They're actually filming this outdoors too. I feel like now they would do this on a set and make it all digital and it would look like shit. See, that's our opening. That's what we get. Why does the White Walker let him go? So the opening shows a map of Westeros, and it usually highlights areas that we're going to go during this episode. The actors and actresses have the symbol of their house next to their names in the credits here. The only problem with that is you don't necessarily know which character they play. So it gives you kind of an idea. You know that they're a Stark or a Lannister, but you need to put in a little bit of legwork in order to make the full correlation, unless you know their names by heart, in which case you probably know their houses, etc. by heart. But and those metal rings, that engraving tells a tale of the Seven Kingdoms, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. This huge wall has many castles on it, most of which are abandoned. They only use 3 now: the Shadow Tower, the East Shore Watch, and Castle Black. But I think during the whole show we only go to Castle Black. They don't really address the other castles, if I'm not mistaken. There is quite a bit from the middle seasons that it all melds into one. I gotta be honest. I watched them so quick, and sometimes I was a little bit distracted. One of the things that pisses me off, though, is the fact that I remember the Littlefinger Lady Aaron storyline. So I'm reading the book, and a lot of the stuff that you are supposed to think is going one way, I already know it goes another way. And it's kind of frustrating me that I know that. So for some reason, that White Walker let this dude go, and he's made it way south of the wall. He covered quite a bit of distance with no horse or anything, when you think about it. I believe that it's supposed to take 6 weeks to get from Winterfell to the wall, if I'm not mistaken. Beautiful Winterfell. So he walked on foot for like months?
Go on.
It's supposed to take 6 weeks riding a horse.
And your mother.
This is our introduction to the Stark family.
Fine work as always. Well done. Thank you.
That's the scepter. The gal with the red hair was Sansa Stark. Here's Arya Stark. Arya's more of a tomboy. She doesn't like doing this shit, and she is envious of her sister, who seems to have been given all the gifts. She's pretty, she's well-spoken, she's talented, everybody loves her. And she's more like her father. Bran is shooting the bow and arrow. That's Rickon. There's Ned Stark and Lady Stark.
Practicing, Brad. Go on. Don't think too much, Brad.
And Jon Snow there. And Robb Stark there.
Put your bow on.
Jon Snow is a bastard. In the TV show, the area that you're born in, if you're a bastard, determines your last name. So because he's from the north, his last name is Snow. I don't know exactly which. I believe the Riverlands, your last name is Rivers. King's Landing, it's Waters. In Dorne, it's Sand. I'm not sure if there's other ones.
The hills. Capture the deserter from the Night's Watch.
So Jon Snow is supposed to be Ned Stark's bastard. But we're coming at this from the angle of having seen the whole show now and knowing that he's actually Aegon Targaryen, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna Stark. And that they actually got married prior to it, so he's trueborn. He's not a bastard at all. And Catelyn hates Jon because of the fact that Ned treats him equal to her kids that she had with him. And they don't really go into as much detail in the show, but in the book, essentially, she has Robb. Ned goes off to war with King Robert, and he comes back with Jon. And she is hiding out at the Eyrie with her family, with Robb. Ned gets back to Winterfell with Jon before she does, and Jon is already all set up with his wet nurse in Winterfell before she even gets to move in with her kid. And it created an animosity towards Jon that she never really got rid of. She despises Jon.
To my family. I'm a coward. I'm sorry.
So the Night's Watch is a lifelong oath. And he deserted. And they don't believe his story. But of course the audience knows that he's telling the truth. So they're going to carry out this, quote, justice of beheading him for deserting his watch. But really they probably should have listened to him. That huge sword actually has a name. It's called Ice. They don't address that in the show at all. It's been in the family for generations and supposedly is as sharp as the day it was made. It's like 400 years old, back when the blacksmiths used to use magic as well as fire. is what it says in the book. Whoop. And as you can see, beheading with one clean shot. I'm glad they didn't hang on that too long because it was clearly digital, and I like realistic effects so much better. So Robb there would be the heir of Winterfell. Bran there would be next in line because he's the youngest, but Jon doesn't count. And then, of course, Ned. He's the Warden of the North. You boy.
Understand why I did it?
John said he was a deserter.
In the book, Bran is 7, Jon is 14. I think Robb is a few months older.
You should swing the sword.
Is it truth or
The weird thing that I never established while I was watching the show is that Jon is actually a few months older than Daenerys. For some reason, I always pictured Jon as younger than Daenerys.
The madman sees what he sees.
Actually, is he a couple years older than Daenerys? They're around... Anyway, he's older. And I always pictured her as a few years older than him, especially since she's his aunt. Anyway. So here's a dead stag.
What is it?
And they're going to find that in the process, basically this stag killed a direwolf while the direwolf was killing the stag. So the stag died and in the process killed the direwolf. The stag is the sigil of House Baratheon. The direwolf is the sigil of House Stark. And there's a symbolism to that the stag is about to kill the direwolf, like King Robert is in some way about to put Ned in danger. And Catelyn actually sees it as a sign, but because of Ned's ways and following the old gods, doesn't bring it up to him. And they don't really even tread that water in the show. Direwolves aren't supposed to be this far south. And I don't understand why, just because it's south of the wall, they think they need to kill the puppies. See, after reading the book, all this moves along so quick. The way, like...
The mother's dead.
I don't belong down here. Better a quick death.
No one lasts without their mother.
I guess that's a... Those puppies look old enough to not need milk. In the book, their eyes aren't even open yet. But for some reason, Jon's is. His is the only one that has eyes open. And of course, it's albino, so it has red eyes. And the way it's phrased in the book, I think, is might be telling. It says that Bran wondered why Jon's puppy could see when all of the others were still blind. And I'm wondering if that's supposed to be like foreshadowing to something, some kind of ability that Jon is going to have down the road. I'm not sure. And Jon made a much more compelling argument for keeping the puppies in the book. He actually uses the fact that he's a bastard as the selling point for why they need the puppies. He leaves himself out willingly so that the other kids can get to keep the dog. Also, for some reason, in the show, he's the runt, but in the book, he grows way faster than the other ones. He's bigger than the other ones. I don't understand why they decided to make him a runt in the show. Now we're at King's Landing on the eastern seaboard. Is it roughly like in the middle of Westeros, would you say? It's very far south of Winterfell, but like if Winterfell was at the top and Dorne's at the bottom, is King's Landing kind of in the middle? Yeah. This is the funeral service for Jon Arryn. who was formerly in Hand of the King. Weird fucking funeral. No offense if this is how you want to do your gig, but don't do this shit with my body. Cersei Lannister and her twin brother Jaime. She is queen. He is a member of the King's Guard.
You worry too much. It's starting to show.
And you never worry about anything.
So, of course, at this point, initially the audience doesn't know their relationship. But coming into it knowing that they're fucking each other and that Jon Arryn was running down King Robert's bastards and was making the connections that Joffrey, Tommen, all the kids aren't actually Roberts, that they're the bastard kids of Jaime. It's even more misleading knowing that, because you're looking at this going, oh, they killed Jon Arryn because he was going to find out their secret and air their business, and Robert would have killed everybody. So until you know the Littlefinger twist, even upon repeat viewing, it appears that they killed Jon Arryn, which is kind of the catalyst for this whole thing, which makes me interested to see how Littlefinger is used in the books, because I know a lot of people were pissed when he got killed on the show, and it didn't have the impact on me that maybe it should have, but I also hadn't read the books. I'm wondering if he's much more of a puppet master in the books moving forward. I forget what this fucking tree is called. It's got a heart tree? Is that it?
All these years and I still feel like an outsider when I come here.
You have 5 nobles.
That's another aspect of the story that they just briefly tread over.
I wonder if the old gods...
He grew up in the north. He's a Stark. The Starks have always lived in the north. She's from more south in the Eyrie, where they have more sunshine, more flowers, more meadows, a springtime.
King's Landing.
And they come from two different traditions religiously. So she's really has to work to kind of mesh herself into this life that she doesn't feel is a natural fit.
Your sister, the boy.
They both have their health. Godspeed.
In the book also, Robb, Sansa, Rickon, and Bran all look more like her, and only Jon and Arya look like Ned.
The raven brought morning.
They kind of messed with that a little bit in the show.
The king rides a Winterfell. With the queen and all the rest.
And because of that, Arya always felt especially close to Jon.
I know one thing he's after.
You can always say no, Ned.
So I forgot to tell you, or talk about it, but so he just got informed of Jon Arryn's death, and they don't really elaborate on that until much later. But Jon Arryn was like a father to Ned from, I think, age 8 on.
A man of his stature.
And him and Robert were kind of, King Robert were kind of raised together by Jon Arryn in the Eyrie, and I think that's how he met Catelyn. So it was like the death of his surrogate father he just was informed of, and he was informed that the king is riding for Winterfell. This scene doesn't happen in the book at all. And Theon, I believe, is supposed to be older than that. I think Theon's an adult. He's over 18. Whereas Robb and Jon are 14. So it takes a month to ride from King's Landing to Winterfell. And both the book and the show just skip basically that entire period of time.
Gods, but they grow fast.
And you can tell by how much the dogs have grown that the time has passed.
He's got hundreds of people. How many times have I told you? No climbing.
But he's coming right now.
Bran doesn't start climbing this early in the book either. It's interesting.
I want you to promise me.
But that's like some immediate foreshadowing, some very short-term foreshadowing. Almost too obvious.
You know what?
I wish that, in fact, that they wouldn't have done that.
Run and find your father. Tell him the king.
Because it telegraphs the fact that he's probably going to have an accident climbing later. It just gives you that impression because they're going out of their way to have her give him this warning. There's Arya wearing, like, what the fuck is she doing? Is she trying to hide amongst the common folk? Fancies herself a soldier? That's another thing they never really come out and explain in the books, in the show, is the puppy names and how they arrived at them. There's Joffrey, the Hound. I love that helmet, but you can see it bouncing up and down as he rides. That would get annoying. Clank, 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 clank. Joffrey has long blonde hair, long curly blonde hair in the book. I think that gives him the more regal, prickish impression or look. I would have liked it if the show had long hair too. It would have been funny. Hodor is huge. So, King Robert in the book is supposed to be close, around the size of Hodor. He's supposed to be a giant of a man. So as much as I like the casting of Mark Addy, I feel like they really should have had a bigger, more imposing character. It would have pulled it off even better. Because he's supposed to be this berserker, warrior, just barbarian of a man. So to have him be giant also. Now here comes the queen in her fancy pants, carriage or whatever it's called. They use a lot of words in the book I'm not accustomed to. Fucking find myself looking up some shit, I'm not gonna lie. So that's King Robert. It's been years since Ned has seen him. A lot of the kids have never seen him. And basically, he doesn't live up to the memory or the expectation. He's gained a lot of weight. He's totally out of shape. He's fat-faced. He just feeds himself and fucks and drinks now. It is really good casting. I just wish he was more giant-like. And they also have a weird relationship because they're basically brothers from another mother. And Robert became the king. So, even though they're friends and they can kind of bust each other's balls, Ned always has to acquiesce to what the king wants. Because he's the king. So it's kind of an odd dynamic. Where he's your friend and you want to tell him to go fuck himself, but he's also the king, so you really can't.
Your name is?
Arya.
Show us your muscles.
Your muscles. You'll be a soldier.
That's Jaime Lannister, the Queen's twin brother.
Would you please shut up?
And in the book, Tyrion is with them at the beginning. He comes in with everybody else. He doesn't just scamper off to the whorehouse immediately out of sight and have to be retrieved by Jaime.
Take me to your crypt. I want to pay my respects.
We've been riding for months, my love. Surely the dead can wait.
See, and upon first viewing, I didn't realize, like, the importance of Robert wanting to immediately go down to the crypts and pay his respects to Lyanna. Because I'm still trying to piece it together, figure out who the characters are. I have to adjust to the accents. It's a lot at the beginning to try to, you have to figure out the names and their place in the society. So to realize how important this actually is on your initial viewing, I think is difficult. I'm trying to pay attention to their conversation. They don't even tell you what you're looking at here. These are all the former kings of Winter or lords of Winterfell. There's statues of them all where their grave is, and they all have a sword laying on their lap. Some of them have rusted away to nothing.
I need you, Ned. Down at King's Landing, not up here where you're no damn use.
And in the book, he asks him this after they go see the sister, not before.
I would name you the Hand of the King. I'm not worthy of you.
So Lyanna Stark is really the catalyst for
I'm trying to get you to run my kingdom.
all of the chaos. The rebellion of the usurper.
You help me win the Iron Throne, now help me keep the damn thing
And the overthrowing of the Targaryens.
together. If your sister had lived,
The eventual death of Daenerys because she is Jon's mother.
I have a son, you have a daughter.
Because she ran off and married Rhaegar, got pregnant with Jon. Robert was in love with her also. So the war was really over her. And Robert is kind of ignorant to the fact that she actually loved Rhaegar. He thought she was kidnapped, but she clearly wasn't in hindsight. Now that we've seen how it all plays out.
It is true what they say about the northern girls.
She is actually a porn star, which is perfect casting. She actually can act, and she's comfortable being nude a lot, and I'm not arguing with it. The first season is when we get the heaviest dose of nudity, and look at them titties. Ooh. She doesn't have a bad ass either. I'm not generally into redheads, but I'll make an exception for her.
And there's the clever one.
They were making more of an attempt to make Tyrion blonde then, too.
I hear he hates that.
And Peter Dinklage is an outrageous actor. He's so good. It worked out so well that the book called for a little person, and that Peter Dinklage is available and fits the role perfectly and is such a great actor. It's just, you couldn't have set out to make a better combination. Just right time, right place. What the fuck was I talking about before that? Oh, how essentially the war started over
The meaning of a closed door in the whorehouse?
Lyanna Stark, and how
Teach me no doubt.
Robert is basically ignorant to the fact that she didn't want him.
She has our cravings.
The Targaryens may have never been overthrown if not for Robert's delusion
I've begun the
over Lyanna Stark. That's what it boils down to, essentially.
I thought you might say that.
So that's the catalyst for the origin point.
Come on, girls.
And then somehow Bran and Jon and Daenerys and everything at the end is where it's going to culminate. And it's all going to make sense, right? I hope so. Please tell me it's going to make sense. I want to know. It's such a good story. I just want it to make sense. But you see how much Robert loved her. He's really broken up about this.
Did you have to bury her in a place like this?
And in the book, they go more out of their way to show or to explain how much Ned loved his sister.
This is where she belongs.
Ned might be the most honorable character in the entire show, no? In the entire lore? The only mark against his name is that he had a bastard son who wasn't even actually his.
It's done.
He was protecting him from Robert. Because as you see later on in this course of this season, Robert wants anybody named Targaryen dead. Speak of the devil. So there's no way that Robert would have let Jon live. Being the product of his worst enemy and his greatest love. So he has lived with this his entire life and never told anybody. And it's like he has to wear it like a scarlet letter. So now we're here to Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen. I think they stopped dyeing her eyebrows at some point. They making more of an effort to dye her eyebrows back then.
Been his guest for over a year and he's never asked us for
I think she's always wearing a wig. She has dark hair.
He knows I won't forget my friends when I come into my throne.
So we don't get a lot of explanation in the show as to who they are. Like, we don't really know their importance to the Seven Kingdoms at this point. But their dad was the king before Robert. Oh, back when Emilia Clarke would still get naked. See, she signed on to do this knowing full well it called for a lot of nudity. And then a couple seasons in was like, I wanted to be known for my acting, not my tits. Well, you signed on to do a story that called for tits. I'm sorry. Like,
You don't want to wake the dragon, do you?
see, that's his threat he makes to her. You don't want to wake the dragon, but
History of my reign speaks this
in retrospect,
again today.
it's laughable that he thinks he could be king. But upon first viewing, I didn't know exactly what to make of his character. Oh, look at, yes, beautiful. You got those little dimples on your lower back. Look at the thigh gap. I'm loving it. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Cute as a motherfucker.
too hot, my lady.
You're so sexy. Very sexy. See, Targaryens have this thing that they can't be burned. And she likes the sensation of the water being so hot. And it doesn't harm her. But as I was saying, upon first viewing, I can't really make sense of the Viserys character off the bat. And he's gone as quickly as he comes. But in the book, in retrospect, it is very laughable that he ever thought that he could be the king. Just imagine him sitting on the throne. It's almost as ridiculous as Joffrey. Essentially, they've been on the run ever since their dad was killed, bouncing from house to house. They're like couch surfers, essentially, trying to keep safe because they know that Robert wants them dead.
Do you see how Montanis? When Dothraki are defeated in combat, they cut off their blades so the whole world can see their shield. Khal Drogo has never been defeated.
And his plan is essentially to whore out his sister
One of the finest killers alive.
in exchange for an army so that he can try to go back and win his kingdoms. He doesn't really have any idea what he's talking about, though, or the scope of what he's proposing. The fact that he thinks that he's just going to get this Dothraki army and go over there and take the kingdoms back, in retrospect, is pretty fucking ridiculous. About as ridiculous as him thinking that he's going to be king. Also, a funny element from the book that's not in the show is that sword he's clutching so tight, he borrowed from someone else. It's not even his, and he probably doesn't know how to use it. It's all bravado with him. He's a little bitch, honestly.
Trust me, Your Grace. If he didn't like her, we'd know.
I hate his character, but you're supposed to, so well done.
Cross the narrow sea and take back your father's throne. The people drink secret toasts to your health. They cry out for their true king.
And in the book, he's telling Viserys this with a sense of irony, like almost laughing, like mocking him, realizing how ridiculous it is that he thinks he can be king. And Daenerys is picking up on it.
I wouldn't ask Khal
It plays more dry here and straightforward. The nuance isn't there.
for a king. Kings lack the caution of common men. My apologies if I've given offense.
I know how to play a man.
That's some excellent verbal gymnastics to get himself out of that, though.
I don't want to be his
And she seems very much like a victim Like the way that she's mousy and looks on the verge of tears, and like she just wants to scream and cry no, but keeps it all pent up inside.
I want us both to go home. They took it from us. So tell me, sweet sister, how do we go?
And she's starting to realize that she is probably a dragon and that Viserys is probably not a dragon. Because she knows that dragons can't be harmed by heat or fire. I believe that's a lore. And he just gets raw on her right here and says that basically he'd let the Dothraki army use her as the town pump and fuck her to death if it got him his crown back. And that's supposed to be the exact opposite of who she wants to be
What if he thinks I'm ugly?
in the future.
Is this to you, British prince that ever lived?
Oh, Sansa's hair looking like her mom's.
He's so handsome. When would we be married? Soon, or do we have to wait?
This plays very similar to the book as well, with
Why would he
Sansa is obsessed with
be the most powerful man in the kingdom?
being married and being a lady and all that goes with that.
He doesn't need me.
She's very much more a southern type girl than she is a Stark.
You left your home to come here. And I'd be queen someday. Please meet Father Sigurd.
She even named her dog Lady, which is self-referential. You don't have to, there's no explanation required. You see her character, it makes sense she would name her dog Lady. But, so that's a bit of foreshadowing once we know she ends up being Queen of the North. Arya names her wolf Nymeria, which is after an old female warrior, legendary female warrior from back in the day. And then Jon names his ghost, apparently because it moves silently and doesn't make a noise. Like, in the book, the name of the dog comes as a result of the behavior of the dog, which never really gets addressed in here. I'm gonna have to take a piss. So, hopefully, I can have you guys listen to the show for a second and not get a copyright complaint. Here goes nothing.
Well, you're always welcome on the wall. No bastard.
Oh.
So take me with you when you go back. John. Father will let me if you ask him. I know he will. More than going anywhere. You ready? This way you'll hold. You understand what you'd be giving up? We have no families. None of us will have a father, son. I don't care about that. You might. If you know what it meant. I better get inside. Rescue your father from his guests. Talk later. Your uncle's in the night's watch.
Sorry about that. I drank too much coffee.
I've always wanted to see the wall.
You're Tyrion Lannister,
The imp.
Queen's brother.
Greatest accomplishment. You, your Ned Stark's bastard, aren't you?
I also like the...
Did I offend you? Sorry.
I don't mean to keep referring to the book this much, and it's probably gonna run its course because I'm not gonna be able to read at the pace that I watch the show. But Jon is allowed in the feast in the book. He's just not allowed to sit at the same table with the lords and ladies. And he's kind of glad at that fact because he gets to drink wine as much as he wants, and the other kids are limited to one cup, one ceremonial cup. And Jon is also allowed to bring his dog in, and none of the other kids are because he's not sitting at the royal table. He gets this kind of freedom. He's enjoying certain aspects of being a bastard in the book that we don't explore in the show. He gets a lot of the benefit without being held to the same standard. The only con is that he's repetitively put in his place and told he's a bastard. But because of that, he's had to become very smart and observant and learn when can push the issue and when to back off, when to skirt around things, when somebody's probably irritated with you and to avoid them, when they're in a good mood and you can probably pose questions or hang around. Like, we get much more inside the mind of John early in the book. But at his core, I guess he's the same. He's an outsider, and he wants to run off to the wall as soon as he gets the chance. But in the book, he's only 14, so it's a harder decision for them to allow. And his uncle even encourages him, like, go out and fuck some girls first before you decide you're never gonna do it again. Like, there's no rule you have to be a virgin. You just can't father any children or take any wives. So go visit the whorehouse a few times, and then tell me you want to commit to this life of celibacy. There's a lot of catty, backhanded compliments between the lords and ladies, which you would expect. It's kind of a thin veil of cordialness hiding aggression. It's very passive aggressive, I should say. I guess back then, asking if you made your dress was commonplace. Nowadays, if you said that to somebody, it would almost be like you were dissing them. That's a nice dress. Did you make it? Yeah. It's like you can draw a picture and nobody cares, but if you start making clothes, people start thinking you're weird. It's an odd one. It's always a weird, vulnerable thing to tell people you're making things. I feel that way when telling people I make podcasts and I make YouTube videos or whatever. It feels like a weird spot to tell people. Like, you feel like you're going to be very judged for that. I make clothes. I do this. It's hard to extend yourself in that way. But back then, there was no factories. There was no Walmart. They were making their own shit. I love this interaction and this dialogue between them. And Jamie's a cocksucking asshole right off the bat in the show. Like, he's talking shit to Ned about fighting and sparring. He talks shit to John. Mary Jane. My dog's out here barking at something. Probably a squirrel or... I don't know. In the book, they just got done fucking in this scene, and they're both naked. I wasn't prepared for that. I was like, wait a minute. Because, of course, the unfortunate part about reading the books after you've watched the show is, regardless of what the character descriptions are, you picture the characters from the TV show. You just can't help yourself. So now I'm trying to picture her naked, what her body would look like. And I'm finding myself in a weird spot. Like, do I want to get a semi because of Catelyn Stark? What's going on here? How nice do I want to make her body in my head? These are the moral questions we have to ask each other as readers. Not each other, ourselves. And they set us up for what's about to happen with that scene with Jaime and Cersei talking to each other about Jon Arryn's death. Because now we get the letter from Lady Arryn fingering the Lannisters as having murdered Jon Arryn, when in reality it was her. and they're trying to basically get the Lannisters and the Starks to start fighting one another. So you can see how those little breadcrumbs are being laid out here at the beginning once you know that that's where we're heading. That was the ultimate goal. It was Littlefinger and Lady Arryn trying to get the Lannisters and the Starks to go to war. And that symbolism of the stag dying and taking the direwolf with it ended up being prophetic because, as we know, Robert gets killed, and shortly afterwards Ned gets killed. And so if you really look at it like that stag died and took the direwolf with it, you can also extrapolate Robert dies and kind of takes Ned with him. Because Ned's so goddamn honorable, which is what they turned Jon Snow into at the end. Besides a mumbling idiot who doesn't say much and acts like a bitch, they try to turn him into some type of half-assed Ned Stark. And I don't mean to degrade the character of Jon Snow. I love the character of Jon Snow through the first 5-6 seasons. Just these last couple, they didn't know what the fuck to do with him, other than I guess he's supposed to kill Daenerys. They probably got that note from George, so they kind of had him do nothing up until the point he was supposed to kill Daenerys. I also feel like the books are going to make a much better use of the fact that he's a Targaryen. I think that that's going to come into play a lot more than it did in the show. I just don't think they knew what to do with that. They being D&D, Benioff and Weiss. So this is the Dothraki wedding. This is where Khaleesi gets her eggs. In the book, the Dothraki are a lot more civilized than the show makes them seem. They actually have, like, he has, like, a castle, like a tower and shit. And a lot of gold. A lot of ornate things. See, now we've reached a point in the book that I haven't gotten to, so I can't reference any differences. I know my wife told me that, because they're going to mention here, a Dothraki wedding without at least 3 deaths is considered a dull affair, but I don't think they ever address how many deaths there are. My wife told me in the book they do address that. If you guys haven't listened to my other podcast about Game of Thrones, you may or may not want to. There's just some theories, some bitching, but I ordered the entire book set, and I bought 2 copies of the first book so that my wife and I could start at the same time. I knew she would outpace me and get done first, and then hopefully she'll be done with the second book by the time I finish the first. So she's been sharing little details with me. I know that the Littlefinger reveal will ruin a lot of suspense for her as far as reading the books, so I've held back on that, but I just know I'm not going to be able to forget it. I was hoping that I would, that by the time I got balls deep into the book, some of that stuff would slip out of my mind, and I would be more surprised by it when it comes around, but I'm not. So I see these setups where they're wanting me to think one thing, and then later it's going to go another way. I'm already thinking the other way, unfortunately. So it's interesting. It's a lot easier to make the connections between characters in the book too when you see the names, and they give more backstory. Here's where she gets her dragon eggs. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserys? Does she name him directly? I know he's named after Viserys, but is his name Viserys? So they're petrified dragon eggs.
Magister.
I believe there's a legend of the first dragons being bred by fire, and that's how they cracked, or some shit to that effect. But way down the road, they spell out that Jorah Mormont is Commander Mormont's son. I really should have made the connection earlier because of the names, but I didn't. But in the books, it's pretty obvious because you see, like, little things like that. That Commander Mormont of the Night's Watch is Jorah Mormont's dad. And that the little girl is also a Mormont, the one who kills the giant at the end in that ridiculous fucking little girls can be badass too scene. He kind of gives her the gift of this white horse, which is a weird image they try to introduce at the end when Arya finds that white horse, and I don't know what the symbolism's supposed to be there.
Sir Jorah, I don't know how to say thank you in Dothraki.
There is no word for thank you in Dothraki.
That's an interesting... that illuminates... gives you an idea of what type of culture they have. That the idea that there is no word for thank you. They don't say thank you to each other. There's no such thing as showing appreciation in that way. My dog is going to sit over here and whine if I don't feed her real quick. You're going to hear some rumbling around. It may make you hungry. Maybe you got to go grab the box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch off the top of the fridge. Maybe you gotta lie to your kids in the morning about what happened to it. These are the decisions we have to make and have to live with. Do you. YOLO. So Daenerys is very reluctant this entire time. She feels like she's just kind of being peddled off. And her brother is willing to discard her in pursuit of going back, quote, home to King's Landing and reclaiming the throne. Meanwhile, she, in the books, she wants to go back to a place that they lived when she was a kid. She doesn't remember King's Landing. It more illuminates that they're each trapped in a certain part of their adolescence. Viserys is just old enough to remember living at King's Landing, so that's what he thinks of his home and that's what he misses. Daenerys was younger. She grew up somewhere else. So the next house where they lived, with the red door, as it says in the book, that's what she thinks of his home and where she wants to go. She's not really interested in thorns and kingdoms and all that. This is definitely misogynist and exploitative, but it fits the story. It's for a reason. It's different than classic slasher movie bullshit or whatever. The Hound and Tyrion, a couple of social outcasts. It's not hunting if you pay for it. When do you think the last time the Hound had a piece of pussy he didn't pay for was with that ugly mug?
No, I'm still better than you. I know what I'm putting you through.
It's crazy that Robert has this legacy. He's this legend, this legendary warrior.
You're a loyal friend.
But you can't picture him being able to fight that well now, not in the shape he's in.
But that's what I've got. I hope I'll serve you well. You will.
I don't think working out existed then. You might practice, like shooting your bow and arrow or something. They didn't lift weights or go for jogs. His physical endurance has to be nothing. The part I just got to in the book, Bran has gone on his first climb. And was reading in anticipation that at the end of the chapter he's going to get shoved out the window, but I'm not sure. I'm not certain that's what's going to happen. But as I started reading and he was climbing, I was like, "Oh shit! This might be where he falls out of the tower." I guess he gets pushed. He doesn't fall. But you feel it coming more in the show because we had that scene with his mom earlier that doesn't exist in the book. And we're about to see some Lannister on Lannister crime. Incest is no big deal back then, but it seems to be to the people of the North. The Starks don't trifle with that, but the Targaryens, the Lannisters, definitely do. And can you blame them? They're a good-looking couple. I'm just kidding. I'm not trying to condone incest. It fucks up the biology, the genetic variance aspect. You magnify certain flaws in the genetics that way. That's why certain breeds of dogs have inherent issues, because they get amplified because they never get any diversity in the pool. When you get in a situation where the entire ancestry has had this issue, of course the kin are going to have this issue. All the offspring are going to have this issue because it's generational. They haven't had any external genes added into the pool to try to get that out of the mix. That's how you end up with the Mad King. Or Queen. Bran is 10 in this. He's 7 in the book. And there you have it. So it's a pretty shocking ending to that first episode. Game of Thrones is great at that. At the end of the episode makes you really want to turn on the next one and see what happens. It's like, fuck. It's so binge-worthy. But at the very end there, we get hit in the face with that. Like, holy shit, they're fucking each other. And it gives you... So you see how the episode is playing out. You see their conversation about Jon Arryn kind of implies that they killed him. You get the letter from Lady Arryn to Catelyn that says that the Lannisters killed him. Then you get them fucking each other up there, which is a glimpse into why they may have killed him and what he had found out about them that they were talking about in the throne room. It's such a well put together show. Even though it skips a lot of shit that's in the book, they can't put everything in there. George R.R. Martin wrote it with the intention of it being unfilmable, and they still made an honest attempt of it. So that is Season 1, Episode 1, Game of Thrones. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Depending on how this is received and how I'm feeling about it, I might give it a listen and see if I did a good job. I might keep moving forward with the rest of the series. Give me a like, a subscribe, a comment. Let me know. You can find me on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Avarice Podcast across the board. Until the next time, this is Devin signing off and saying, be easy.